Hi everyone. This episode is sponsored by the Moab Museum, located in the heart of the Red Rock landscape of southeast Utah. Is a cultural and natural history museum dedicated to sharing the rich stories of Moab, Utah, and the Greater Canyonlands region through exhibits, programs, and community events. Join the Moab Museum team this fall for The People's Tapestry, Weaving Tradition in Navajo Culture, an exhibition that features nearly 100 textiles from the Desert Southwest and contributions from the Utah Department of Arts and Museums traveling exhibit, Navajo Children Weaving the Future.
Welcome into Utah Stories. My name is Matthew Pine, and I am here with my co-host, Allegra Zukowitz.
Hi, guys.
And we are pleased to have on the podcast today Nick Lippincott. He is the Senior Manager with Life Saving Programs and Best Friends Animal Society in Salt Lake City. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, y'all. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So if you could just tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do with your organization.
Yeah, so Nick Lippincott. I'm the Senior Manager over at Best Friends in our Salt Lake City Life Saving Center location, as well as our Mountain West region. Our Salt Lake City Center here hosts a large group of staff that help maintain that mission and goal for Best Friends, which is helping to reduce the unnecessary killing of dogs and cats in shelters across the country. Along with Salt Lake and our Life Saving Center and our sanctuary down in Kanab, largest no-kill animal sanctuary in the country, which is pretty cool to tout that. We work throughout not just the state, the region, the Mountain West, throughout the country, helping shelters find ways to reduce killing, get more animals safely in homes.
That's great. That really is.
Okay, kind of speaking to that, what can you do to help dogs and cats in Utah shelters?
Oh, that's a laundry list, but we'll give it a shot. There's a lot. The reality is kind of right now we are facing a bit of a national shelter crisis. That's just the reality of it. Some of it's post-pandemic woes. Some of it's just change in people, what they decide to do. We got more people going and buying things from breeders and pet stores, which is, something that can be, we're not big fans of because we believe that there are a lot of amazing animals, within shelters. All of mine are from there, and I think when it comes to when people ask that question, hey, what can we do to help? There is a lot. And I know everybody's first perspective is, well, I can adopt. Of course, that's the number one reason, right? Number one way to help. But that's not the case for everybody. And we know that. So there are a bunch, and sometimes it's adoption, but sometimes people can't bring animals into their home, maybe not long-term, maybe short-term. So we say, hey, foster, that's something that is probably one of the most impactful ways to support, and sometimes even more impactful than adoption, because our fosters, for example, in Utah at our Salt Lake Center, the majority of our animals are in our foster care support systems, getting ready to go and getting socialized or medical care and getting everything they need to be really good adoptable pets, so they know when they go home, they're home for good. That's still a stretch though. Sometimes we know, we'll have university students or, who live in apartments or maybe can't have pets. Well, I still want to help. Volunteer, go to the shelter. It's as somebody who started in municipal sheltering, I started in animal control in Florida. We had a huge shelter, 25,000 something animals a year in the early 2000s were coming into our shelter, and 100 staff split across 7 days a week. That's not enough to take care of everybody and give that, we kind of call that capacity for care, that amount of time that really makes an impact for an animal to keep them socialized and healthy and happy, relatively speaking. So our volunteers were key aspects of that, to make sure those animals are taken care of. A couple minutes, a little walk, clean the kennels, interact, make toys, make blankets, whatever you do. Even laundry is so incredibly helpful to shelter staff. Yeah. Everything matters. Yeah. And even more so because a lot of the times our shelters are often, in terms of government funding and support, not always getting as much as they maybe should.
Right.
I'll speak truthfully to that. So volunteering is a huge one. And then, there's the other stuff, not always being involved in the animal care side, but donate. If you have something extra, and not just money, sometimes products. Those blankets need to show up somehow, right? Those care items, those toys, or just transport, or even just posting on social media when you see the shelter posting for, hey, we need help getting these animals out, share that in your neighborhood and just get that word out that there are really good options, because maybe it's not adoption, maybe it's actually getting an animal back home to somebody who's been looking for a long time and is really happy to finally get that pet back. That's all the difference it can make sometimes. It's great.
Yeah, I'm going to throw some troubling statistics at you. The number of cats and dogs killed in our state simply for lack of homes has nearly doubled just from 2021 to 2022. In 2020, 829 dogs and cats were killed because they didn't have homes.
Right.
In 2021, it was 886. Last year, it jumped to 1,700. What are your thoughts about this statistic?
Well, it's a thought that is on mind pretty much every day. Obviously, you know, one of the big focuses of my job specifically is finding positive outcomes that shelters maybe can't always find on their own for some of the animals in their care, the dogs and cats. So we're getting a lot of, you know, those animals in that maybe weren't the first picks, or finding, you know, resourcing, getting them out to shelters or getting them to other rescues or partners, sometimes even out of the state and around the country. But, you know, like I mentioned, Utah is a little bit of a reflection of what we're seeing nationally. And we are in a shelter crisis. And what that means is the amount of homes just is not meeting the amount of animals, you know, that are showing up. And, you know, it's a multiple different factor situation. There are a lot of variables at play in that. And, you know, there are some post-pandemic woes, we think, you know, in terms of some people say, hey, well, does it mean people going back and they're returning animals? Maybe, but I think maybe more so it's that during the pandemic time, a lot of these shelters and services were closed or restricted or removed to the public. And once those started up, we're starting to see, you know, animals showing back up. Housing abilities is another thing that's high on the mind. You know, again, pandemic, we saw, you know, evictions were frozen, and we see that starting back up again. So pet-friendly housing is becoming more of a challenge. Is a challenge. We're seeing that nationally. You know, so there are a lot of issues there, and we're seeing a lot of kind of stalling in terms of adoptions, you know, dog adoptions stalling, and I'm just pulling, you know, a stat or two, but they've stalled, you know, it's under 1 million nationwide, and, you know, we're still doing good work. The reality is we're still, when we look at our trends, you know, Best Friends is a data-driven organization. We work on life saving, but we use the data that we're pulling from shelters around the country to kind of show us trends. And we're still seeing positive momentum in terms of there are increases in life saving overall, but we've hit a bit of a bump in the last year or so where we're not getting enough, you know, back out there, or we're not stemming the tide of ones coming in.
Right.
Yeah.
Does it help for pets to be microchipped?
That is my favorite topic in the world. Okay. Yeah, I cannot emphasize, I think, the benefits of microchipping above almost anything else that we can provide, next to maybe spay and neuter, obviously, to make sure we're saving lives in shelters. You know, in terms of microchipping, it's such a simple procedure, and by simple I mean it's a matter of seconds and a matter of, you know, pennies on the dollar. It's, you know, most shelters nowadays are gonna, a lot of them are gonna, I don't want to speak for most of them, provide them for free. You know, they have understood that, hey, this is a way to make sure that animal's not showing back up or staying and taking that kennel up in my shelter. And that's the reality too. These shelters, especially in Utah, we have so many. We have 60 shelters in Utah that are brick and mortar, you know, municipal or like Humane Society shelters. That's much more than normal. Usually, you know, it's the most in the Mountain West next to Colorado. And every one of those kennel spaces, you know, should house a dog or a cat. But we're seeing, you know, with the overpopulation, we're seeing, you know, doubled up in kennels sometimes. That capacity is really a struggle. So every one of those cages that's taken away is potentially a space for an animal that's not going to be able to fill it. And that's going to lead to, you know, shelter killing. It's going to lead to deaths. So if you're able to microchip your pet and keep it registered, keep it current, which is really, it's so easy. I mean, you know, a microchip is just a serial number, a barcode, essentially, like you'd have a supermarket, and it's going to have information that's really easily accessible to an animal services officer or a shelter or veterinarian. And if I started as an animal services officer, I started in the field. If I were to go out and as soon as I touched an animal, first thing I did after getting a leash on him and give him a, hey, you're going to be okay, buddy, is a scan and check for that chip in the field. I can spend 5 minutes looking up that information and maybe another 5 minutes getting it back home, because the reality is most animals in the first couple of days are within a mile from where they live when they get lost. I can spend those couple minutes, get them back home, or I could do all that, put them in my system, drive all the 45 minutes, 30 minutes back to my shelter, drop them off, unload them, impound them, spend time, money.
It's just an
It's
efficiency.
it's a huge inefficiency. Yeah. Like I said, I will go on forever about microchipping. But and the benefit is, hey, it allows the community to see a positive interaction too.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much better to have a, oh my God, thank you as an officer, that happy moment of, oh my God, I'm getting them back home.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, as opposed to having to go through the mess of the system of going and getting them back out of a shelter. Even with the best intent, that's a hard process and a challenge sometimes for people, even financially.
Yeah, and I think most importantly for people listening, how can Utah residents actually support your organization?
Yeah, I think the best way to support is to support the shelter closest to you. If I'm being honest. Like I said, there are so many shelters in the state, and Best Friends, the animals that we're pulling into our care are not from the public. They're from shelters that need help. So by going to your shelter and supporting them, that's probably the key way to help support us, because it allows us to focus our space and our resources on, other shelters that may be in need. That's a huge aspect. If you want to be more hands-on, like I was saying earlier, that volunteer, that foster, donate. Salt Lake City, for example, because we have our sanctuary in Kanab and we are so centrally located to a lot of states in the region and the country, transport volunteers are a huge benefit to us.
Yeah.
It's kind of a supply and demand sometimes when it comes to animals, and certain demographics and areas do tend to adopt different types of dogs. So we have people who are willing to drive. Amazing volunteers coming to mind where they'll drive to Oregon in like a less than a day's notice and a full van of cats and dogs, and happily bring a bunch back and get back, unload their truck, and say, all right, where am I going to next? Those are a dime a dozen, and a godsend to a shelter. And the other big aspect I really would say is get to know your shelter, get to know where to go if your critter, your pup, your dog, cat, whatever gets lost, right? That's a number one. But then also know the programming that your shelter has in place. And if there's something that maybe we're talking about today that you come to find out the shelter doesn't have, find out why and see if you can get it implemented. These are, everything here, the adopt, foster, donate, transport, post, advocate, really. Those are proven, unquestionable, successful programmings that save lives and improve everything within a shelter system for the employees, the community as a whole, everybody. And get them in place. Do your part to, speak your voice as a community member and say, hey, we really want this. We can really benefit from it. And if you're in Utah, reach out to us, and we're probably going to be wanting to help you get them there too.
And how can people find you online?
So Best Friends is a, being the wonderful organization it is, we do have a really good online presence, bestfriends.org. Or if you're in local, you could do bestfriends.com, bestfriends.org/Utah.
Yeah.
And that'll take you right to Salt Lake.
Troy's bringing it up on the screen right now.
Perfect. Yeah, there you go. Totally. And what's great is, we do a lot of programming with shelters and trying to build up this aspect, and just going to the websites of our shelters is another great way. Sometimes we don't know, if you lose your dog, that's where you start.
Yeah.
Go online, because we try to push more and more, hey, look on the websites and get shelters to publish those animals on the site. So I see who's in that shelter right before. I can now look across the state if I'm looking to adopt online and see everybody. Perfect. Almost, which is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Kind of similar to that question before, how should you educate others about this topic?
It's a good question. I would say what's important, because it is, animal welfare as a whole, right, is full of incredibly passionate humans who care so incredibly deeply at a scale that just continues to impress me, honestly, the longer I've been in this field, because I'm passionate, but I'm nothing compared to some of just advocates. Like, they're so incredibly involved and care so deeply. It's amazing. I would say when it comes to education, the most important thing I always have has come from a standpoint of open and listening and knowing, because there are two sides, again, as a field officer, you'd go to one door, you'd knock and hear a complaint, then you go talk to the dog owner and you hear, and I empathize with both sides. So truly, stop, take the time, listen, understand. And, when we do trainings and we're working on programming of shelters, saying, hey, find that best way to meet that compromise, educate with the best intentions and with open minds, knowing that, people have very different perspectives on a lot of things, and we can be respectful of that, and we can honor that, and we can, appreciate it. But still, at the end of the day, there's, nobody wants an animal being killed for no reason, when they have a better outcome out there, and we can prove that. We've done the polls, we've done the research, that's never the desire of, most people when it's asked. So educate through openness and acceptance and, wanting to help and empathy, really. I mean, it seems simple, but it sometimes gets lost in this because there's so much passion tied into it. And I think, find the right resources and connect them to stuff like bestfriends.org, which has a huge library of resources for pet owners, for shelters, for both professional and personal tools, which are there and incredibly impactful and useful.
Wonderful.
Yeah, totally. Is there anything else you wanted to add at all?
Let's, to be totally honest, I think that regardless of, we're having conversations about shelters having some struggles right now, and there are some upticks and we're seeing some crisis moments right now. That's just the truth of it. I think taking a moment to really commend, especially in Utah over the last couple of years since I've been here and working with some of these shelters, the amazing work they've been doing and some of the fantastic progress that we've seen firsthand. We are within the country, Best Friends is really happy to say, hey, we started when there were, over 1 million animals dying and hundreds of thousands, now we're at such a low percentage of that dropping to, under 300,000, from 1 million over the course of a couple of years. That's great progress. And even though we're having challenges like this, knowing and commending the shelters and the volunteers and the advocates and everybody involved on the fantastic work they're doing, and knowing that progress is not lost and really is appreciated. And to people within the community to say, hey, take the time to appreciate the people willing to commit that much time and passion and their life, professionalism to working within this field, because it is a hard one. And, taking the time to spend, we call it shelter appreciation at work, it's a requirement. Everybody shows appreciation to the shelter staff that they're doing amazing work out there, and they shouldn't forget that.
Great.
Thanks so much, Nick, for coming on, and thanks for tuning into Utah Stories.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Nick.
it.